A brief history of Haddam Meadows State Park. Haddam Meadows State Park is a 175-acre park along the banks of the scenic Connecticut River in Haddam, Connecticut. The park provides visitors with an opportunity to boat, fish, and picnic. Established in 1944, the park has a boat launch, playing fields, and walking trails. It exhibits a variety of landscapes, including meadowland, marsh, beach, sandbar, and hardwood forest, and has a rich past closely associated with the history of Haddam. Haddam's earliest residents, the Native American tribe Wagunks, used Haddam Meadows for its exhaustless fertility and grew crops such as maize, pumpkins, squash, beans, sweet potatoes, and tobacco. In the Native American culture, it was the women who tended the crops while the men hunted and fished. The English settlers arrived in 1662 and were drawn to the area in part because of the wide open meadows along the banks of the river. The original proprietors created home lots, which were long, skinny, rectangular parcels that extended to the river and included parts of the meadowlands. Settlers also had common meadowland, which they shared for cultivating and pasturing. Residents used it as grazing land for their cattle and horses and growing crops, such as barley, wheat, and rye. The area was never developed due to the flooding which occurred most springs because of melting snows and spring rains. The spring freshet replenished the meadow soil by making it ideal for agriculture. Early town documents show that residents held regular meetings regarding the meadowlands, including the election of a Hayward, who was the person in charge of fences and enclosures and keeping of the cattle. Duties included watching the livestock and protecting crops from thieves. By the early 19th century, shipping as well as fishing had become important to Haddam's economy. The southern part of the meadows lies on the river channel, and a dock and a store were constructed at the bottom of Station Hill and featured the Red Store, a pier, and wharf. In the 1840s, the road down to the dock was known as the Crossway. By the late 1800s, the wharf had been abandoned and most shipping was done from Arnold's Wharf farther to the south. For much of the 1800s, the meadows remained grazing and farming land, with commercial activity along the banks. At the northern end of the meadows, the river channel shifts to the east side of Haddam Island. This area has a prominent sandbar and historically did not service significant river traffic or business-related activities. In 1871, the Connecticut Valley Railroad was constructed between Hartford and Old Saybrook and ran along what is now the western edge of the park. The railroad was the brainchild of James Walkley of Haddam. Haddam had 5 railroad stations, 2 of which were in the park's boundaries. The Haddam station was located at the bottom of Station Hill, and Arnold's Depot was located further south, just north of Mill Creek. Flooding was a common occurrence in the spring. Here is a couple sitting on the railroad tracks during flooding in 1915. After serious and deadly flooding in the spring of 1936 and the hurricane of 1938, flood controls were put into place upriver, including dams, dikes, and flood walls. The sheriff's shack was located at the foot of Station Hill and was a converted boathouse where Sheriff Bert Thompson of the Haddam Jail held summer gatherings, picnics, and ball games. Sheriff Thompson was known as a genial host, and his parties were legendary. The shack was demolished in 1958. In the early 20th century, wealthy businessman and Haddam native Edward Hazen started purchasing property in Haddam, including a number of pieces in the town meadow, from various local families, including Russell, Williams, and Arnold. Hazen owned and operated Hazenhurst Farm and a local apple orchard as a gentleman farmer. He actively served the town in local politics and served as state senator. Hazen died in 1929, but through his foundation continued to buy property along the riverfront with the intentions of turning it into a park. In 1944, the Edward W. Hazen Foundation gifted the state of Connecticut approximately 155 acres of the meadow to become a state park. This was a compilation of property from Hazen, his sister, Mary Hazen Arnold, and various other families of town. The gift of the foundation was done in memory of Mrs. Mary Hazen Arnold, who lived in town her entire life and was a great nature lover and was especially fond of birds, bees, and flowers. During World War II, drilling exercises were held in Haddam Meadows. In the early 1950s, the Meadows was one of 5 area finalist towns to have a steel mill erected on the site of the river's edge. The state of Connecticut, however, banned the proposal, noting that the property would revert to the Hazen Foundation if no longer used for open space. In 1953, Haddam Meadows saw over 9,000 visitors to the park and was used by local baseball teams and area organizations, including the Middlesex County Bar Association, Wesleyan Alumni, and Granite Lodge for picnics and gatherings. In 1962, Haddam celebrated its tercentenary, and a full week of activities and festivals took place at Haddam Meadows, including a production of Haddam USA, which included over 100 town people and a very large stage. Other activities included a junior field day, fashion show, beard contest, and airplane rides. The 1980s saw a number of festivals use the meadows. The Connecticut River Raft Race left Essex in 1980 and found a new home running from Herd Park in East Hampton and ending at Haddam Meadows State Park. In 1985, the first powwow was held at Haddam Meadows State Park. In the early 1990s, things were dire in the state of Connecticut, and barriers were installed to block access to the park as a cost-saving measure in 1991. Today, however, the Meadows continues to host baseball teams and charitable events. The Lions Club of Haddam hosts a car show every July, and the Flywheelers host an antique engine show in September. Haddam River Days is held each year with amazing fireworks and other celebrations. People continue to use the park for exercise, dog walking, hikes, and boating. Thank you for joining us for this brief history of Haddam Meadows State Park.